Let's continue here tonight. Electricity Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa says he's having sleepless nights about Koeberg's Unit 1, which isn't operational. It was taken offline in December for planned maintenance, refuelling and life extension works. The minister says the delays are impacting on load shedding as the national grid is currently short of 920 megawatts of power. For more on the story, we're joined by energy expert Hilton Trollip. Hilton, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. What a week it has been on this issue, right, with the Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa talking about Koeberg, its closure, and why it is that it was actually brought to the end of service. I want to firstly begin with asking you what you make of the remarks and whether the minister's reflections are accurate that Koeberg was shut down because of funding that's related to renewable energy.
Good evening, Kathy. I actually haven't heard the comments yet that Koeberg was shut down because of funding connected to renewable energy. But I can assure you that any such statement is actually, there's no evidence to support the connection between the funding for renewable energy and Koeberg being shut down. Koeberg has been shut down very clearly to carry out what's called life extension upgrades. So Koeberg has been running for 40 years, and in order for it to be safe, it needs a whole lot of major upgrade work done, refurbishment of major equipment on it. And that is why it's been closed down. And in fact, it was closed down about 6 months ago, to start with, for the first refurbishment. And because of mismanagement at Eskom, they weren't ready to do it. So they did the refueling, and they started it up again. And now that was the other one. And now they've closed it down again for this refurbishment work. It's got absolutely nothing to do with renewable energy at all, the refurbishment. And if I might say, the minister being worried about Koeberg because of load shedding, I think we should be worried about the mismanagement of the refurbishment at Koeberg for load shedding, because it's putting Koeberg offline for much longer than it needed to be because of mismanagement. And there's no argument about this. This is a matter of fact. But what is even more worrying than load shedding is that if they complete the refurbishment and they don't do it according to necessary standards because of pressure being put on Eskom management, and then the National Nuclear Regulator, which needs to extend Koeberg's license to operate, which expires next year in 2024. The National Nuclear Regulator has to carry out independent inspections and get reports on the work done at Koeberg, and only if the work is done according to very exacting standards that apply to nuclear power stations should the nuclear regulator extend its license. And lots of time pressure is now being put on the nuclear regulator. And I'm not sure, Kathy, if you'd like me to follow along that line of talk.
Sure. And just before you continue there, Hilton, I want to quickly correct myself. I got my stations wrong there. It was, in fact, not Koeberg that he was referencing there. It was the Komati power station when it came to those comments around the closure of the power station and that being linked to funding for renewals. Of course, we know that nuclear energy has been a big debate for the country, including part of what the energy mix needs to be going forward. In terms of the latest IRP5, Integrated Resource Plan, that is still sort of being finalized, do you think that we are going to continue to see nuclear energy at the scale at which the last IRP had spoken about?
So the last IRP, the nuclear energy that was put into the IRP, they said South Africa will develop nuclear energy at a scale and pace which it can afford. They didn't actually schedule a certain amount of nuclear energy to be built at any stage. And it's no secret that the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy is hugely supportive of nuclear against much economic analysis, which shows that, firstly, nuclear isn't necessary on the system. They make an argument about baseload, which is a myth about it being necessary. It simply is not. And no reputable scientific community, maybe maverick scientists might say that it's necessary, but you won't get any kind of peer-reviewed work that says it's necessary. And secondly, it's much more expensive than the alternatives. But it has been pushed into the IRP despite its economic irrationality. I do want to make a comment there on nuclear, which is kind of linked to the statement that the electricity minister made about Komati. The electricity minister made about 8 strong statements on Komati that were immediately fact-checked. And this is now in the media. They've gone through each statement he made. And in fact, there were a number of articles in the newspaper. Somebody, what was a new word, a euphemism for lying? But anyway, there were all these euphemisms for basically somebody lying. And what the electricity minister is now clearly on record. Beforehand, he was kind of skirting around with evidence which didn't lead to conclusions and things. But he's now on record as saying things that a number, not just a mistake, a number of important things that are simply, there's no evidence to back them up. They are fabrications. And we must be really worried when the same electricity minister starts putting pressure on Eskom management about being, he said he's very, very worried about nuclear because, it's one thing, as I say, having load shedding, but it's another thing starting up a nuclear power station if we haven't got the necessary independent regulation and checks and balances by competent people to do this. And Koeberg's lost the Koeberg station manager. There has now been this controversy with Mr. Oberholzer leaving under suddenly he's terminating his contract after some questions around Koeberg. So I'm very worried about what's going on at Eskom. And then there's an additional very important part of this. Eskom have been overly secretive about this Koeberg upgrade right from the start. They had to start planning for it in 2010. At that stage, they put in a budget amount, I think, of, I haven't got the number in my mind for the moment, but it turns out that it could be, we've looked at these numbers, it could cost twice, 3 times, 4 times as much. And Eskom aren't being transparent on these numbers. So they're kind of going ahead with large expenditure without clarity as to what the total expenditure would be, secretive, and without a license from the nuclear regulator yet for this extension. And so we're going to be put in the situation, possibly next year, that they complete the refurbishment on one of these stations. They've now said they're going to delay the other one beyond the 2024 expiry of the license. And we're going to have one station ready to run according to Eskom, but the nuclear regulator has to give a license. And recently there was a court case with one of the nuclear regulator board members where the judge castigated the minerals minister for unlawfully and illegally suspending and trying to fire this board member because the minister claimed he wasn't independent. And yet the board member was actually exercising his independent judgment, which is crucial for regulation. And because he had said various things that the minister disagreed with, the minister decided that he was not implementing government policy, which is not actually the regulator's job. The regulator's job is to assure us that safety is, all the measures are taken at the station. So we now have a board with one member still suspended. The minister has appealed against this court judgment, despite the fact that it was castigating, with a suspended member, and the other members not sure if the minister is going to decide to suspend or fire them if they aren't sufficiently compliant with departmental decisions and Eskom decisions. This is exceptionally worrying to me.
All right.
Because I want to put one other point. We're a member of the International Atomic Energy Association, but just a member. They don't approve the license, but what they do is they issue reports on Koeberg. And they issued a report after their last visit here last year with a number of very worrying items around Koeberg to do with how it had deteriorated in its 40 years of service. And these issues haven't been dealt with publicly by the regulator. They haven't been addressed. So we might also be in a position next year that we are trying to recommission for another 20 years of service a nuclear power station which the International Atomic Energy Agency has got outstanding issues in a report, at which stage apparently the Americans won't supply us with nuclear fuel at this stage. They've terminated the agreement. Only the French are left. And if we don't comply with International Atomic Energy Agency, if we don't respond positively to their reports, we might also be suspended as a member there, in which case we'll have a nuclear power station that we've spent tens of billions of rands refurbishing, which we can't get fuel for unless we then turn to our new friends, the Russians or the Chinese, for fuel. And you can imagine that situation.
All right.
So huge political pressure is now starting to swirl around the independent regulation of Koeberg, with huge pressure being put on a minister that is on record this week of, let me just call it, being exceptionally economic with a number of truths, bringing his integrity into the picture. And this really worries me.
Hilton, that's all we have time for tonight. We'll have to leave it there. Hilton Trollip is an energy expert.